So, last night I was able to go see Angel Studios' Homestead, starring Neil McDonough and Don Olivieri. And I've got to say, in a genre where a lot of these end of the world type stories are filled with rehashed cliches, Homestead was able to craft their version of an end of the world story in a pretty unique way. Not just in how it takes a more realistic approach, but just in how they choose to go about setting up the whole initial conflict, which ends up being a nuclear fallout, being the call to action for our characters and their journey. Another thing I find really interesting about this film, and I really liked, is the complexity of it. Because usually in films like this, you know who your protagonists are, you know who your antagonists are. Homestead's not quite that simple. Like these guys, they prepared for whatever catastrophe may happen. A remote community that had resources, the homestead. And still, even with those resources, they aren't guaranteed anything on their survival because it's still limited. They still are gonna run out. Meanwhile, there are a whole lot of people who did not prepare. They're outside of the gate and they need help. And these guys, they're not letting them in because they barely have enough as it is. But you have kids, families, even people who they know outside. So it presents this big moral dilemma. I really like the realistic approach because protagonists make pretty bad choices sometimes, and at the same time, you can understand why and put yourself in their shoes. And also, another thing is like you don't know who is dangerous or not. Like there's one scene where there's hunters outside of like the homestead base who aren't, part of the homestead community, and you have like a younger, inexperienced watch guard around like the outside of the base, and you see these hunters, and he tries to warn them with a megaphone, but the batteries are running dead, so they can't hear what they're saying, and it's like, why are they still pointing the gun in this direction? Like, are they trying to kill us? And you just feel so much tension in that, and there's a lot of tension that you feel throughout this film. And there are certain parts where you're like, oh, that's a little too realistic, and I love that. I mean, there's kind of times where this movie has you going like, okay, well, which characters are really good? And I think the honest answer to that would kind of be no one, because while protagonist or antagonist in their heart, I think, would like to do good, would like to help others, they just have their own ideas on what that is and how to achieve that. And they have their own personal interest in mind as well. And then you have the whole question of, but at what cost? Because it may come at the expense of this person's life, or it may come at the expense of your own life. Like, it presents these questions of, I can let this person in, they can eat, but in a few weeks, I won't have enough to feed my family. Or we should try to siege as many supplies, as many resources as we can, so we know what we're working with, and then distribute that like on a larger population scale. So I just find it fascinating that there's so many perspectives and so many ideas, and none of them are really perfect, but it's like people are trying. They're trying with what they know, and in some cases they don't know anything. Again, it's pretty realistic in that sense. And this movie's just a sign of Angel Studios' ever-growing production value. They're really swinging for the fences with Homestead, and it's just a lot bigger than what they've made in the past. I think that Ben Smallbone did a great job directing this. He has a very clear visual style, and that really benefited the movie, and makes the world feel bigger than what it may actually be. I wouldn't mind if they'd have gone a little bit bigger, but I thought I'd mention that. Also, my buddy, Jared Lemaster from Anti, yes, we're still working on that show, hold tight. He is in this movie and playing a character called Rick, who is one of the unprepared outsiders. And the scenes with him and his character's family I just think it's some of the most interesting stuff in the entire movie. I might be biased, I doubt I am, but it's fine. Especially the opening scene that they're in. Not the opening scene of the movie, but the first scene that Jared is in. Them having to flee from their home due to some of the dangers in the area, people going unhinged because of everything that's going on in the world. That just felt very Last of Us-esque. Then the stuff later on with them having nowhere else to turn, being at the gates of the homestead, just... Though I only wish we could have gotten to see more of that. People dealing with survival and the craziness of the world outside of the homestead. In fact, I kind of wish that we would have stayed in the period towards the beginning of the film a little longer, and focused more on the average person and society's response to nuclear fallout. So, I mean, like, are there certain things that I wish maybe would have been done a little bit differently? I mean, sure. But then again, I think this is the kind of story that finds its footing more as it goes along in terms of the tone and performance, just really all the aspects. I do think it could have benefited from having a bit of a shorter runtime, cutting down certain scenes to focus more on, the meat of what those scenes were going for, and then spending a little bit more time to focus on the world building and the lore, character dynamics, and backstory. Like, how do certain characters have some of the knowledge that they do? How did they get some of these resources? Like what started how did they start the homestead program? And even with the thing like the two brothers at the beginning of the movie who started like the whole main conflict, I like that. And I would have liked to see more of that, some things like motivation. But then I also think about like how other movies of this type don't even give us that much. So it's a real treat that we got what we did, and I'm grateful for that. And not everything has to be explored in full detail either. I feel like some things are going to be left to the series. Like, while this does very much work as its own story, it's also very much the beginning of a story. And when you're watching that, it has that written all over it. And if you didn't know that this was a series, yeah, they're streaming episodes on the Angel Studios app right now. I haven't seen them yet, but when you get home from the theaters, you can check it out. It's actually based off of a popular book series, like a best-selling book series, which I don't know the title of it right now, but so the material is already there. Finally, I thought I'd mention that this movie's ending actually has a very Christian message. And by that, I don't mean outright gospel. This movie's actually barely preachy in a religious way, but more so trusting God. And this may be a spoiler, but I'll try to word it not as one as much as possible. Trusting God and doing what you know is right, even when it seems crazy, and you're out of options, and you don't know any way of how this is possibly going to work out. But it can often be surprising. So that's my review of Homestead. I do recommend this one. Also, I might add, great soundtrack, and it needs to be experienced in theaters. So be sure you go see this one, and be sure to check out the series on Angel afterwards.